Today. Uh, we are recording this meeting so that those who are not here will have access to it. I am Joe Cook. I am with Georgia River Network, and I will serve as the moderator today. I'm serving in place of Jesse DeMumbrian Chapman, who has the flu, so he's working behind the scenes. He says that we don't want to hear him talking because he mostly coughs. But he is feeling better today, but I'll be taking his place. So this is hosted by the Georgia Water Coalition. It's a consortium of over 285 organizations, businesses, and faith-based groups working together to promote statewide water policy that ensures enough clean water for current and future generations. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. The link, as I said earlier, to the Dirty Dozen report online is in the chat box if you want to check that out. And after the press conference, we will send out a press release to all media outlets in Georgia. Hang on just a second. There we go. If you could, be sure to mute your personal lines, cut down on background noise. We'll mute all lines if y'all disobey. So if you'd like to send a question, you can do that through the chat box, and we'll try to direct those questions to the appropriate people that are with us today. We'll also, after we complete the formal presentation, we will open the conference up to questions. Back to why we're here today. We're hosting this as a briefing to provide media with information related to the release of the 2022 Dirty Dozen report. This year's Dirty Dozen report is our 12th edition, and it is unique in that it celebrates the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Clean Water Act by highlighting 12 legal actions that have helped shape implementation of the Clean Water Act in Georgia. So this year's Dirty Dozen is a look back at dirty issues that got cleaned up because of the Clean Water Act. So with us to help present the Dirty Dozen is Rena Peck, who's the Executive Director at Georgia River Network. And together, she and I will try to keep y'all entertained with this Dirty Dozen presentation. Let's begin. As we mentioned, this year's Dirty Dozen looks a little different. It takes a historic look at the last 50 years since Congress, interestingly, in a strong show of bipartisanism, overrode President Richard Nixon's veto of the Clean Water Act and passed the landmark legislation in October of 1972. The progress that has been made since then in cleaning up Georgia's water has been remarkable. But we still have a lot of work to do to make all of the state's water bodies swimmable and fishable. The legal cases highlighted are mostly in chronological order and span a time frame from the 1980s through recent years. We'll start with Alma versus the United States. In this case, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency invoked its veto power to stop the construction of a 1,400-acre recreational reservoir in Bacon County's seat of government, the city of Alma. The federal agency has used the veto power only 13 times in the 50-year history of the Clean Water Act and only twice in the last 32 years. But it did so in the case of Lake Alma because construction of the lake would have had unacceptable adverse impacts to wildlife in the wetlands surrounding Hurricane Creek. The project has a fascinating history. It was first proposed as part of President Lyndon B. Johnson's Model Cities program in the late 1960s, when, inexplicably, tiny little Alma was chosen along with the 149 other larger cities to be part of the president's program aimed at renewing urban areas and ending poverty. The reservoir was seen as an amenity for local public housing projects built under the Model Cities program and as an economic driver for the small South Georgia community. But local advocates saw it for the boondoggle that it was. Their efforts in one of South Georgia's first modern day environmental battles helped stall the project until EPA finally ended it for good. Next up in the timeline is Sierra Club versus Hankinson. This one is special to me personally because the organization that I used to work for, Coosa River Basin Initiative, was involved in it. In this case, a coalition of grassroots watershed protection organizations, including Coosa River Basin Initiative and Ogeechee River Valley Association, along with the Sierra Club and Trout Unlimited, filed suit in 1994 to force the federal government and the state of Georgia to begin implementing the Clean Water Act's TMDL program. The program is designed to identify pollution problems in specific streams and then develop plans to restore those streams, and Georgia wasn't doing it. When the suit was filed, Georgia had only 20 employees dedicated to Clean Water Act compliance, while neighboring states had teams of more than 100 working on compliance. The judge in the case said that at the current rate, it would take Georgia 100 years to comply with the Clean Water Act. The plaintiffs won, and today hundreds of cleanup plans have been implemented for Georgia's polluted rivers and streams. Both the Coosa and Savannah rivers have benefited from the TMDL program. Ironically, the Hankinson named in the suit was EPA's administrator for the Southeast region, John Hankinson. John was widely seen as a strong advocate for clean water, and he was well liked in the environmental community. He told Doug Haynes, one of the attorneys for the plaintiffs, that the law upset his mother, who asked him, "I thought you were doing good things for the environment. Why is Trout Unlimited coming after you?" I'll now turn it over to Rena Peck, Executive Director with the Georgia River Network, for the next two cases. Rena, go.
Okay. All right. Next up, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper versus City of Atlanta. From the 1960s through the 1990s, the Chattahoochee River downstream of Atlanta was often described as an open sewer. Into the 1990s and early 2000s, rain events in Atlanta sent a combined brew of stormwater from the creek's streets and sewage spilling into the city's creeks and onto the river. Despite the ongoing pollution, state and federal environmental regulators seemed content to issue ineffective fines and let the city continue to pollute. The upstart Chattahoochee Riverkeeper entered this septic fray in 1994, intent on forcing the city of Atlanta to fix its failing sewer and stormwater systems. A year later, the nonprofit organization filed a suit under the Clean Water Act's citizen suit provision, and by 1998, the city agreed to a consent decree that led to a $2 billion investment in the city's sewer and drinking water infrastructure. 2 decades later, sewer overflows in the city have been reduced by 99%, and bacteria levels in the river are 80% lower than levels measured in the 1990s. What's more, people are returning to the river that was once written off as dead. New parks have been developed along the river downstream, and the river now supports canoe and kayak outfitters and even a commercial sport fishing guide. We had our Paddle Georgia on the lower Chattahoochee this year. The United States and the state of Georgia versus Dalton Utilities also made waves in the 1990s. In the 1980s, when Dalton Utilities began constructing a land application system along the Conasauga River, federal and state regulators praised the project and called it the wave of the future in wastewater management. The utility would spray partially treated sewage on 9,600 acres surrounding the river, and Mother Nature would just filter out the pollutants before they reached the river. But the system didn't work that way. Within a decade of the system becoming operational, both the state and federal regulators filed suit against Dalton Utilities because the system was polluting groundwater and the Conasauga River. The $6 million penalty that resulted from the legal action was the largest fine in the history of the Clean Water Act, and it forced tens of millions in upgrades to Dalton's sewer system. Unfortunately, pollution from the land application system has not altogether ceased. PFAS, man-made chemicals used to make stain-resistant carpet has been sprayed on Dalton Utilities fields along the river for some 3 decades. Today, these forever chemicals that have been linked to human health impacts can be found in the drinking water supplies downstream from Dalton. The cities of Rome and Gadsden and Center, Alabama have all sued Dalton Utilities and multiple carpet and chemical companies to recoup the millions those communities have had to spend to making their drinking water safe. Now back to you, Joe.
Thanks, Rena. Next up is Driscoll versus Adams. Here's a question for y'all. If mud from a development site washes onto your property and damages it, is that a violation of the Clean Water Act? Well, today we know that it is, but in the mid-1990s, the legal waters were a little muddy on this issue. So when a pair of Union County residents found their ponds filling with mud after an upstream neighbor cleared 75 acres of steeply sloped forest, they set in motion a conflict between neighbors that would ultimately clarify that mud, sand, and sediment or pollutants regulated under the Clean Water Act. And property owners who failed to prevent such pollutants from entering adjacent property or nearby streams are liable for damages. The conflict was one of the first construction stormwater cases litigated in Georgia, and the 6-figure ruling in favor of the plaintiffs got the attention of home builders and developers across the state. Next up is Burkhalter versus Claxton Poultry Farms. We move south down to Claxton, where in 2000, a longtime property owners on the Canoochee River filed a Clean Water Act lawsuit against Claxton Poultry Farms, a chicken processing plant that was polluting the river and spoiling an historic family swimming hole on the river. Pollution from the plant was causing massive algal blooms on the Canoochee, leaving Linda Smith's family swimming hole covered at times from bank to bank with a thick, slimy, floating mat of algae. Armed with courage and a bulky video camera, Smith began documenting the pollution. Her efforts soon attracted the attention of attorneys and a young graduate student at nearby Georgia Southern University who began investigating nitrogen pollution in the river. The Clean Water Act lawsuit filed by the Smith family in 2000 ultimately forced Claxton Poultry to create a new land application system and secured funding to start Canoochee Riverkeeper, a nonprofit citizen organization dedicated to monitoring and protecting the river. Now we'll go back to Rena. Go, Rena.
I'll again. Here we go. Thanks, Joe. The Ogeechee Canoochee Riverkeeper, the organization established through the lawsuit against Claxton Poultry, took legal action against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to prevent the harvest of 100-year-old cypress trees on a man-made reservoir near Statesboro, appropriately named Cypress Lake. The Corps was set to allow the harvest of 60 acres of waterbound cypress, black gum, and tupelo trees via the Clean Water Act's forestry exemption, but the Riverkeeper stepped in and said, not so fast. They argued, and the courts agreed, that for timber harvest in wetlands to be exempt from the Clean Water Act, the harvest must be part of an ongoing forestry operation, not a one-time harvest without reforestation. The outcome of the legal battle helped define exactly what forestry activities are exempt from the Clean Water Act and save some 60 acres of ancient trees. From the Canoochee, we head north to the Tallulah River for the U.S. versus Wright Brothers Construction and the Georgia Department of Transportation. When rains wash over construction sites and other land where vegetation has been removed, stormwater naturally rushes downhill, carrying with it mud, sediment, and sand that can literally choke the life out of streams and rivers. And when it comes to moving dirt in Georgia, nobody does more of it than the state's own Department of Transportation. Yet inexplicably, the State Road Building Agency was exempted from the state's original Erosion and Sedimentation Act adopted in 1975. In the quarter century after passage of this landmark legislation, DOT was essentially only self-regulating. All that changed in 2000 when Georgia began enforcing portions of the Clean Water Act, specifically addressing dirt pollution from construction sites. After a resident on Northeast Georgia's Lake Burton complained to Georgia's Environmental Protection Division about sediment from a highway project fouling the normally clear mountain reservoir, EPD was faced with taking action against a fellow state agency. Ultimately, federal regulators initiated legal action. The $2.8 million settlement that resulted in DOT's attention got the message across that it's clear as day that the 7-figure settlement also says that the state agency was now accountable for keeping dirt from their road projects out of Georgia streams forever. Now back to you, Joe.
Thank you, Rena. I will now take you back to 2007, when the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency deemed DeKalb County's sewer system a failure and took action to force the county to fix their aging collection system and treatment facilities. The result was a 2011 consent decree that required the county to pay a $453,000 fine to the federal and state governments, improve some 20% of its sewer lines in so-called priority areas, and achieve specific pollution reduction goals by 2020. But improvements were slow in coming. The 2020 deadline came and went, resulting in an amended consent decree in which DeKalb County paid another $1 million in fines and promised, among other things, to fix by the end of 2027 more than 100 sites where multiple sewage spills had already occurred. While the county has made progress since 2020, the scope of the work, estimated to cost $1 billion, is daunting. And critics contend that the mandated fixes are not enough to fully eliminate sewage spills, and that ongoing sewage spills disproportionately impact DeKalb's lower income and predominantly Black communities. In 2021, the South River Watershed Alliance sued DeKalb County, arguing that the amended 2020 consent decree failed to fully enforce the Clean Water Act. Now from DeKalb County, we're going to jump south again to the Ogeechee River, where in 2014, Ogeechee-Canuchee Riverkeeper filed suit against King America Finishing, a Screven County textile mill. Discharges from the King America mill were responsible for the death of some 38,000 fish in 2011, an incident that rolled Ogeechee River communities and scared river users away from their beloved river. When the state's response to the ongoing pollution from the mill was weak, the Riverkeeper stepped into the fray. The result was nearly $6 million in investments to protect the river, most of which would not have been made had enforcement of the clean water laws been left solely to state regulators. Earlier this year, the owner of the textile mill announced that it would be closing the mill and that it would eliminate the use of all PFAS in products produced at their other mills. Just discharges of the forever chemicals from the plant have tainted fish in the Ogeechee, according to tests conducted by Ogeechee Riverkeeper. PFAS have been linked to multiple negative health impacts in humans. And we go back to Rena.
All right, we're down to our final two now. In 2014, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper received a complaint from a citizen about pollution from the manufacturer of an asphalt sealing product located near the river. When Riverkeeper investigated, they found a scene reminiscent of the kind of pollution that was common before the passage of the Clean Water Act. Black, oily runoff was seen coursing from the manufacturing site toward the river. State regulators were slow to respond, and by the time they could conduct their own investigation, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper had already filed suit. The ultimate result was a $500,000 cleanup of the site, an additional $90,000 for anti-pollution projects along the river. But more importantly, truly, both federal and state regulators have strengthened their industrial stormwater enforcement programs in response to the stunning pollution. And finally, we will end with a case that wound up all the way to the Supreme Court. In 2016, Upstate Forever and Savannah Riverkeeper filed a lawsuit against Kinder Morgan, operator of a petroleum pipeline that spilled some 369,000 gallons of gasoline near Belton, South Carolina. The gasoline seeped into nearby wetlands and creeks that flowed to the Savannah River. And even 2 years after the spill, tests showed that contamination in nearby creeks was increasing, despite there being no direct connection between the spill site and the creek. The pollution was instead entering the creek via groundwater contaminated from the pipeline spill. Appeals took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, which was receiving multiple similar cases in which contaminated groundwater was polluting surface water. While the High Court did not take up this case, it ruled in a similar case that when a polluter contaminates groundwater and then pollutes surface water, that discharge is regulated under the Clean Water Act. With this ruling, Kinder Morgan, which has already spent $17 million on the cleanup, agreed to a settlement in which the company would continue groundwater remediation at the site and pay $1.5 million to set up a fund for citizen science and water quality projects in the upper Savannah River. Joe?
Thank you, Rena. So that is this year's Dirty Dozen. Each of these 12 cases has helped improve the health of Georgia's water and the people and wildlife that depend upon it. And while we celebrate the cleanup of some of these dirty situations, we also know there is still work to do. Throughout the state, pollution from municipal, industrial, and agricultural activities poses an ongoing threat to our rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Water pollution continues to have adverse, disproportionate effects on communities of color and low-wealth communities. The Clean Water Act can and must be used to address these current and future pollution problems. Among those current issues impacting Georgia's water that the Georgia Water Coalition is following closely are the following. In Charlton County, Twin Pines Minerals, an Alabama-based mining company, is proposing a heavy mineral sands mine along Trail Ridge immediately east of the Okefenokee Swamp. The mine would damage important wetlands and could threaten the swamp's hydrology and water quality. Georgia's Environmental Protection Division is now considering issuing permits for the mine. To protect the swamp and the tourism economy that supports local communities, EPD must deny permits for this risky project, and state legislators should act to permanently protect the Okefenokee and Trail Ridge. Next, across the state, more must be done to prevent unpermitted discharges from land application systems like the ones that we highlighted in this report, like the one at Dalton Utilities along the Conasauga River. And these discharges include discharges of the forever chemicals like PFAs or PFAS. So that issue has to be addressed. We need to get a hold of these emerging pollutants and keep them out of our drinking water sources. And finally, at Georgia Power Company's coal-fired power plants, EPD must require the company to excavate coal ash from its unlined ash ponds that are now polluting groundwater and remove that ash to store it in dry lined facilities away from water. So that concludes our kind of formal presentation of the 2022 Dirty Dozen report. We'll now open it up to any questions that y'all might have. I see one question from Maris Lutz. She asked, are these listed in any order of importance? No, they're not. They are listed in basically in chronological order. We view all of them as equally important. So they are not listed in any order of importance. If you would like, what we're going to do is Jesse is going to unmute everybody. So if you have a question, you can just speak up and ask your question. And we have several people that were involved in these cases, and we can direct your questions to the appropriate person. So does anybody have any questions they would like to present verbally now?
So can I respond to Jill's question real quick?
Yes, this is Tanya Bonitabitis, Savannah River Keeper.
Hey, sorry,
Thank
I
you,
have
Tanya.
a little one sitting in my lap too. So, but the question is, how is the uncertainty around the WOTUS rule play into the Clean Water Act? So one of the issues that was highlighted actually was the DOT fine on Lake Burton. And just yesterday, dealing with that exact same issue again, except this time there's a lot more question about the streams that are coming in and whether those actually deserve regulation. So it is right in the middle of a lot of different issues related to the enforcement of the Clean Water Act and throughout at least our watershed, from all the way from the mountains to down to the coast.
That's a great example. And of course, the big poster child is Okefenokee, with waters of the United States being redefined. If the Clean Water Act can't protect the Okefenokee swamp, what can we protect? So thanks for asking that question.
Jill, following up on that, there are wetlands on the site of Twin Pine Minerals, the location where they intend to dig for the heavy mineral sands. Originally, those wetlands would have been protected under the old WATUS rule. The new WATUS rule that was implemented during the Trump administration removed those wetlands from protection. And because of that, only the state has authority to deny the permits for that mining operation. So all federal oversight of that particular project has been removed because of the change to the waters of the US rule. So it is definitely impacting the current issues that we're watching closely. Does anybody else have any questions?
Hey, I have another question. This is Jill with the Georgia Recorder. With the land application systems, does that also include the soil amendments that we hear so much about, especially in Northeast Georgia? And if so, how big of a concern are these soil amendments moving forward?
I'll take that one. So the soil amendments are not, they're not regulated by the Environmental Protection Division. They're actually in a loophole that is protected by the Agriculture Department. It is a huge concern because even the stuff in Rome that was once in land application has now in many places been reclassified as a soil amendment. I'm sorry. Has been reclassified as a soil amendment and is not receiving any type of regulation currently. So it is a very large problem. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. And if anyone else wants to add to that, the notebook is open.
Hi there. This is Marissa with the Savannah Morning News and Augusta Chronicle. And a question that I had was, while we've, seen all these great impacts from the Clean Water Act, I'm curious in recent years how Georgia has worked to increase or maybe failed to work to increase state water protections, especially when we're talking about pieces like the Okefenokee, where we're seeing, with WOTUS changes, maybe some things are losing federal protections. What has the state of Georgia's water protections been looking like? And, what kind of movement have we seen there?
You know what? I'll start. This is Doug Haynes. Let me tell you what it used to look like. And then those of you who are more active can tell you. When we started Georgia Center for Law and the Public Interest, one of the first things we did was went and reviewed EPD files and looked for, there were thousands and there were probably millions of violations on record. There was no prosecution. There was no changes in permitting. And frankly, the only thing that made it different was litigation. And so over the years, and this is the soil amendment, this kind of fits into that in terms of getting a pollutant named. way back when, turbidity was ignored, color was ignored, and some of the features that are in water pollution were completely ignored by Georgia. Once lawsuits got started, things started changing. And I don't know, those of you who are more active now, I'd like to see if you think that the EPD is doing any better job in regulating.
We actually, we have with us a retired EPD enforcement. I don't want to put him on the spot, but I guess I am putting him on the spot. Bert Langley is with us, and he might be able to speak to kind of having recently retired in the last few years, his perspective, and then it might be interesting to get a perspective of one of the river keepers who's on the ground trying to get enforcement done. Bert, am I putting you on the spot?
Of course, and wouldn't be the first time. Enforcement's always been an issue, and it's always been something that comes and goes with the political climate. That's just the reality. We've had EPD directors who were very enforcement oriented, and we've had EPD directors who want to do anything they can not to do enforcement. It always comes down to resources. There's limited resources available, and EPD has always had to do our best to prioritize the ones get our biggest bang for the buck. That's just been fact. So much of it is also based on leads we get from the federal side. EPD historically never wanted to regulate stronger than the minimum federal standards. That was basically EPD's philosophy from the 1970s forward, and there's still a lot of that going on. Recent years, the pandemic has really hit us hard. So many people being away from the office for so long, and people like me retiring. When I retired, I think I had more years in, I think, than anybody else at EPD at that time. And since then, many more have retired. So we now have a younger, newer group of people with less experience. And by not being able to be out in the field with other
I think Bert's feed froze up on us. Do one of the river keepers want to kind of give a perspective on how they are seeing state enforcement of the Clean Water Act currently?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'm
This
Jason
is-
Alseth, Chattahoochee Riverkeeper. And I've been with Chattahoochee for over 15 years and came from Georgia EPD and the Georgia Soil and Water Conservation Commission. So I do have background working for the state agencies as well. And I think the biggest issue, as Bert was mentioning, is the lack of resources and the lack of staffing that is at Georgia EPD. And we see, one person that can be in charge of hundreds of different sites over multiple counties. And when we file a complaint, it's a lot of the times we get a response, well, we don't have the resources to come out and even do an inspection. So a lot of that does fall on local governments and nonprofits trying to fill those voids where you have the state agency that is so underfunded and not really allowed to have access to the resources that they need to enforce our environmental regulations.
I'd have to agree with Jason's assessment. We end up doing a lot of the legwork or the sampling work for EPD and delivering the results to them. And they also kind of drag their feet in certain issues or regulations. One comes to mind is Georgia is one of the few states that still hasn't adopted nutrient standards for nitrogen and phosphorus. And, we're probably 2 decades behind on that. Which would really help us and put another tool in our toolkit to help improve water quality. So I'd say in general, Georgia EPD does honestly, it seems like they do the bare minimum requirement not to get in trouble with the feds at times. And I think a lot of it is that they're starved for funding and resources.
I would like to add a special case where they are going above and beyond EPD is, and that is in looking at the Twin Pines mining site proposal. So they're definitely doing more than the feds, right? And they, there have been over 100,000 comments that have come in from citizens as well as scientists, and they've taken that information. They're listening to University of Georgia hydrologists who've assessed the modeling and the surface mining plan, and such as Dr. Rhett Jackson, who's come out and said this will make the St. Mary's and the Okefenokee in that area go dry for longer periods of time and more often. So they have what they need to deny the permit. Hopefully it won't come to a lawsuit. I don't see how they can be sued when they've got that type of evidence. But I will say that they are going above and beyond the normal surface mining permit review, which is usually they send it out for public comment for 30 days after they've already drafted a permit. And now would send it out for 60 days where the public can review the application. And then if they do decide to move forward with a draft permit, then that would go out for another 60 days. So there's a lot of due diligence, and I appreciate the attention of the governor and EPD on the Twin Pines matter.
Can I give a perspective from, first off, the citizen groups are the firewall. And I can't say that any more clearly. That is how things get observed. That's how things can be changed. And at the legislative level, when I got into the Senate, they were horrified, just horrified that this crazy environmentalist was there. So that's the way they perceive us, and it's not right. But the most important thing that citizens can do is engage with your local legislative people. And that doesn't mean the people who are in the state. I'm talking about your commissioners, your council members, because those people have the ears of the people up the chain. And you mentioned Rhett Jackson. There are a bunch of state schools. I don't know how many, there are 32 now in the university system, I think. People like Rhett Jackson are out there. Todd Rasmussen was a go-to guy at UJ. That's why we set up Georgia Center for Law and the Public Interest in Athens. One is that we had the university, the research university there. And frankly, two, because it wasn't Atlanta, which gets so much focus. Love the Chattahoochee Riverkeeper, don't get me wrong, but the resources are few and far between. But at any rate, I think that matters. The other thing that I think is important is I was thinking about the wetlands and the waters of the state, and thinking about what we do in terms of mitigation. And I haven't been dealing with these issues for a long time, been more dealing with kids. But one of the most important things is that we don't allow these little pockets of conservation. Any Walmart you go to has this little 1/4 acre retention pond with nice grass in it that doesn't have any access for wildlife. It doesn't have any effect on surrounding waters. And so when you look together, and I think this is a good cell for getting as many groups as possible working together, is to try to figure out ways to get the state to do that. And it sounds like I'm beating up on EPD, but when I say that the firewall, those are the firewall people we go to. And Bert's knows full well there. It changes with the political environment, and it changes with how many people there are. Overall, the people with the boots on the ground are good folks, and they're doing it out of good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add, one of the things that we've always highlighted in the Dirty Dozen report in the past is how the state funds EPD. And if you look back on funding through the years, and I would encourage the reporters that are on this call to give EPD a call and get a hold of their records for the amount of funding that they've received from the legislature over the last 20 years. And you'll see that it's fairly stagnant. That's one of the issues that's been raised here. And I would encourage the reporters to look into that. If anybody's interested in that, I do have some figures, I think from not the last 2 years, but from the previous 18 or so years. So if anybody's interested in that, they can contact me to get some of that data. But funding for EPD is really critical. And we do have the Georgia Water Coalition has set up a action alert that is on our Protect Georgia page. And it is calling on citizens to contact Georgia's leaders and encourage them to fully fund clean water enforcement here in Georgia. That link is in the chat room. Jesse just put that in there, and we're encouraging all citizens to contact our state leaders and encourage them to, fund EPD and these water protection efforts. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. This is Maris Lutz from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. We've heard a lot about funding for EPD. I was wondering, EPD is a part of DNR, which has a twofold mission of conservation, but also promoting development. That's written into their mission statement. Do you see any conflict in having this one agency that is supposed to be both environmental regulator and also, promoting business and development?
Anybody want to tackle that one?
I will.
I see a big problem with it. They should be separated. From a political standpoint, it's not about people putting money in their pockets. It's about pork coming back. And when I say pork, it's not going into politicians' pockets. It means we're going to get this project. This is how we're going to use this land. And that's a viable purpose of government. But I find it to be directly opposite to the idea of protecting resources. They can come together, and hopefully they will. But when you have them in the same agency, you're going to have the same head over both of them. And that doesn't work.
I'd like to take a contrarian view to that. Having been there for almost 40 years, EPD and DNR, for all practical purposes, are separate agencies. In all my time there, I never had a conflict with DNR, Game and Fish, whatever, over development or anything else. EPD acted pretty much independently. The plus side, though, is being part of DNR allowed us access to a lot of people and just relationships that may not have occurred if we were completely separate. In terms of day-to-day activities, I will wager a good third of the people in EPD never even realize that DNR is their ultimate boss, because all they think of is the agency. So I've never seen a real problem with it. And to EPD, we have been able to get some resources and ride on some coattails just because we were part of DNR. And resources and money have always been our big issue. Paying people is next to impossible today at salaries that they'll stay at. But anyway, that's just a contrarian view. While I'm talking, I'd like to step back to something we mentioned earlier, and that's the soil amendment issue. That's one of the biggest things I think we need to start looking at. We've been looking at it. I looked at it a lot when I was with DNR. It's next to impossible to regulate it well because it is so entrenched in agriculture. but it is purely, in many cases, a pathway to take industrial waste and discharge it, get rid of it without having to do anything by calling it a soil amendment. It gets spread out all over the place with little or no regulation. And we have seen over the years a lot of issues that arose simply because of that. And I think it's just going to get worse as the economy tightens, as the cost of other things tighten, and as possibly agriculture sees more reason to allow the discharge of this material. And in many cases, they get paid for it. So I think it's something that bears a lot of looking into and a lot of pressure to agriculture. EPD can do very little to regulate this stuff. And agriculture, while they have the rules, does nothing to regulate it. It's just pure and simple. That's my soapbox for today.
Thank you, Bert. Other questions?
So the other real quick, just to follow up, I'll leave soil amendments alone, but I could not agree with you more. But the question about the two agencies being together, in South Carolina, the environmental protection is connected with health. And I can tell you that that works less and is quite dramatic, because what happens is that the environment gets very little funding, I think even worse than Georgia. So I think it is a constant battle between different agencies and how to split up. But at least Georgia's doing better than South Carolina.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Hey, this is Jill. If we had time, I'd love to hear from Linda Smith about, in her own words, kind of the long-term harm to her beloved fishing hole. And also kind of, it sounds like a lot of her, when she was documenting the pollution that might have been in the 90s, which is obviously before social media. So I would love to hear like how difficult it was for her to get attention to, attract attention.
Linda, I think you're on mute. If you can unmute, we'd love to hear from you. I think
Okay, so am I here now?
you are here, yes. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. We had a difficult time because there was no structure. There was none of this stuff y'all talking about available at the time. And when we went to EPD to file a complaint, they said, well, you're the only one complaining. And I had talked to a lot of people in my county, and they said, no, they had complained to EPD and did official complaints, but for some reason they were not on record. And we did get the, oh, we don't have enough staff to send somebody there just for your little piece of property in that area. But and by the way, my sister Sylvia, that was the primary co-conspirator for our action, she died 2 weeks ago. So it's a sad thing that she didn't really get to see our river get in a lot better shape. It's the water itself looks better, but the property is just so overrun with weeds, and it's obvious nutrients are in the water that's feeding all these weeds. Because for all the years that we've been on that property, there were never any weeds on the sandbar. But now I went about 2 weeks ago and there was no sand to be seen. It's down there under all the weeds. But so what was the question? I kind of went off topic, I think.
I think, Linda, you documented a lot of the pollution with a video camera, you told me. And
Yeah.
how were y'all able to, how ultimately did y'all get the attention that the issue needed? Was it the involvement of Chandra Brown and Don Stack, or what was the tipping point where you started getting results?
Yeah, it was, I contacted Dr. Jim Reichard, and he's from Georgia Southern, and so he sent Chandra to us because he'd really been looking for a study of local waters and pollution and things, and so he sent Chandra, and we had already contacted Don Stack at the time and found out what we did as far as water test. And, that's a difficult for two old women that don't have any education on this kind of thing to be able to provide the evidence. And so they kind of guided us through what we needed, but we couldn't afford to hire experts in the water testing and that thing. So Sylvia and I crept around in the woods and may or may not have trespassed, and took videos of violations that we knew were violations, and we documented time and the occurrence. And there was one little stream that during the day you could go and it would be nice and normal looking, but at night it would come about 3 feet and it'd be green bubbly as it went past. So that told us they're doing things to try to hide what they're doing. So it was quite a challenge.
Yeah, Jill, one of the things that in doing the research and writing this report for the Water Coalition, one thing that struck me is that there are so many stories like Linda's where the Clean Water Act has given citizens a powerful tool to set things right. And in Linda's case, and in so many other cases where citizen groups have stepped in to force state and federal agencies to actually enforce the law. And that is what struck me most about all the cases that are included in the Dirty Dozen report this year, is that in most of those cases, citizens are the ones that filed the complaints or filed the lawsuits and got things corrected. And on this call today are multiple river keepers that are heading grassroots citizen organizations that are still doing that very thing. We have such a powerful tool in the Clean Water Act, and we need to continue to protect that Clean Water Act and make sure that it's there so that citizens like Linda and organizations like Savannah Riverkeeper and Chattahoochee Riverkeeper and Ogeechee Riverkeeper can continue to help citizens right wrongs. And so
I have one more comment, if I
Yes.
can make it.
please, Linda.
In hindsight, I wish that we had required our settlement with the polluter, that we had required ongoing testing, maybe every 2 or 3 years or 5 years or something. And because once it was settled, that's kind of the end of it, and there's been no follow-up and no testing of the water, and nobody's looking at it now.
Yeah.
And Joe, if I can just say one more thing, because I don't think Linda's going to toot her horn enough, Jill. Chandra Brown, and I was the grad student that Linda and her sister Sylvia really took it upon themselves to go educate themselves about the law and about what was fundamentally right for them, and what they knew was right, and using the law. This is a uniquely American law that allows people like Linda and Sylvia and their family to stand up for their property when polluters take advantage of them. And there was one thing that I remember that Linda introduced me to. I wasn't aware of the laws. I was just a scientist studying nitrogen pollution in the river. And once Linda and her sisters again founded this Riverkeeper organization, I had to become familiar with the law. And she gave me a guide, a book from the national group River Network that was a Citizens Guide to the Clean Water Act. Linda, do you remember that? You carried that thing, or you carried that thing around. I think Georgia River Network actually gave it to you. I'm not sure, or if it came from Orva. And there's a new version of that that's just been released by the national group River Network. But there are all of these resources out there for citizens to learn about this law that's there for us to protect our rights and our property when polluters are taking those away from us and the government is not stepping up into the shoes. And Linda, many thanks to her and Sylvia and their family for sticking up for what they knew was right.
Anybody else? Any other questions? If there were no other questions, I'll just close it to follow up with what we've heard from Linda and Chandra is that really the power of the Clean Water Act lies with the citizens. And we have a powerful tool to correct pollution problems, and that is the Clean Water Act. And we have to continue to use that law to correct pollution problems across the state. So with that, we'll close out this session of the presentation of the Georgia Water Coalition's 2022 Dirty Dozen report. I want to thank everybody for joining us, all the reporters for joining us, and all those people that have been involved in all these Clean Water Act cases for joining us. And please do go to our protectgeorgia.org website and check out the action alert there and contact our state leaders and encourage them to continue to fund EPD and to fund clean water enforcement. If any of the reporters do have have further questions, they can contact me or Jesse, and we can direct you to the appropriate people and get you in contact with the appropriate people you need to talk to. Also in the report, at the end of each section of the report, you'll find contacts for that particular issue if you want to contact those people directly, both via email and by phone number. So thanks for joining us, and we'll hope we will see y'all out on our rivers sometime soon. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Oh.